Hello everyone, I hope you had a great day. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. I hope you enjoy them. If you like the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps the channel to grow. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more content. And now, let's start with the first story, shall we? The first story is called Manager Fixes New Policy. Some years back, I worked for a rather large IT company. In our team, we were specialized in a niche field of expertise and used to travel to customers all the time, literally. My travel expenses were often higher than my pay. At a stock market listed company like this, mistrusting employees is as much company policy as paying below market average. So we had to apply for permission before every single trip we took. Normally, our first line manager, Jim, had to sign this off, and that was it. Jim was a nice guy in his late 40s. He spent most of his career with this company. And at that point, he also had been a manager for quite some years. He had a good feeling for which rules could be ignored or banned and which ones to better follow to the letter. Jim genuinely cared for his team and tried to keep us clear of company shenanigans so we could do our actual jobs. Though he was not perfect, to this day he's one of the best direct managers I ever worked for. One year, the third quarter rolls around, which in stock market companies means middle and upper management become conscious of the unrealistic goals they set for year end. And they try to meet them by cutting spending, with everything possible in the book and outside. That year they took aim at the travel expenses once again. A few rule changes here and there. The most notable change for us was the travel expenses request had to be signed off by a second person. A poor devil in Spain whom they promoted to some bogus manager title. Each travel request from all employees all over Europe had to be reviewed and approved by him. We were asked to hand in our requests at least 14 days before starting the trip, preferably earlier than that because there was no stand-in for this guy. Now, as I said, we are experts in a technical niche, which implies a limited number of people who can do the job. Changing travel plans, sometimes in the middle of a trip to go somewhere else and fix an emergency, was part of our daily business. We would give Jim a short call and go. He had our bags and would find ways to make the paperwork look right. In contrast to the company, he did trust us. This doesn't mean he never checked. Everyone knew the rules, no one deliberately took advantage. And while Jim was indeed a nice guy, he was well able to gently correct or hand out a rebel whoop when necessary. Well, with the new rules, changes on short notice were practically impossible. In our next group meeting, we discussed what this meant for us and how to deal with it. Cue Jim's malicious compliance. Look, he said, I know most of you have already planned out your business trips until the end of the year. We need to ensure our customers get on-site support as defined in the contracts. So I'm asking you to make sure your planned trips are not interfered with by pending travel approvals. Hand them in as soon as possible and don't forget to fill in the second approver field. Surely one team's travel requests were not enough to make a full-time request approver go into overload. But I guess we were not the only ones handing in as many requests as possible. Maybe even the normal amount would have been enough. After all, they made the poor Spaniard review the whole continent, probably even more. About 3 weeks later, a follow-up email. The second approver thing gets temporarily paused. To this day, it was never continued. Also, for all the requests I handed in, not one got the second approval. The next story is called No Dirty Shoes. This story comes from a few years back before my grandmother was bedridden because of severe Alzheimer's. After my grandfather died in the early 80s, my grandmother and her youngest sister moved in together. The youngest sister was and is an unpleasant woman in my humble opinion. I doubt she is well loved among the family either. My dad thinks her behavior towards my grandma somewhat sped up the process of her Alzheimer's. I'm fuzzy on the details of when this took place. But my dad decided, as a family, we should take my grandma on a holiday on the Greek islands. His intention was to give her some breathing room from her sister's shenanigans. We spent about a week on Chios and went back to my grandmother's summer house. There was an infrastructural work of some kind just outside the garden gates. This meant there was a big trench with the dirt shoveled on either end. Since my dad had back problems, I had to carry a significant chunk of the suitcases. So I picked up 2 big suitcases and my backpack and walked up to the garden gates where my grandmother's sister greeted us. The first thing she told me, not even a proper greeting, and I quote as well as I can: "Don't walk into the house with your muddy shoes, I just swept up." We packed up and drove all day. I was exhausted and angsty, and this gave me a chance to have my small but fair revenge, so I complied. I walked up to the trench. There, I took off my shoes and threw them over the trench in front of her. I hopped over the trench in my socks covered in mud, with 2 heavy suitcases in my hands and a bag on my back, and went inside the house. I put the luggage inside and went for the second one. All the while, she watched with her mouth agape in shock. My dad questioned me before bedtime. I told him I did what I was told. I didn't go in with my muddy shoes, just muddy socks. He agreed, but told me not to do it again. I wasn't grounded. I could tell from his voice my dad was as amused as me. Not to mention my mother was standing beside my dad and giggling during the conversation. As for my grandmother's sister, she didn't talk to me for weeks, which I thoroughly enjoyed. The third story is called As Early as Possible. I have started recently working part-time for a company which does this weekly food delivery. You order whatever you want for each day and you will get the food until 1 p.m. Most of the customers are elderly people with an occasional young professional. They are pretty nice. However, there was this one older gentleman who couldn't comprehend why I arrive some days around 10 a.m. and some days around 12. The contract says you get the food until 1 p.m. I try to explain that some days we have extra addresses. And on other days I have to collect money, have to stay several more minutes at each address, and with 50 to 60 addresses it quickly adds up. He heard none of it. He told me to bring his food as early as possible. Now, little did he know that we start our delivery around 5:15 to 5:30 a.m. Cue the malicious compliance. Of course, sir, I will try to come as early as possible. So today I showed up around 5:40 a.m. I swapped his address to be the first, as it's not very far away from the kitchen, but slightly out of the way, and it was optimized for the return route. Needless to say, he was gobsmacked. "What the heck? Why are you ringing at this time?" I told him that he said as early as possible. And I apologized that I couldn't come earlier, but the kitchen just gave us the food, so I came as early as possible. Needless to say, he said it's fine if I just come at the normal time. The last story is called Don't Interrupt Us. My grandmother and my mother were both extremely strict about them not being interrupted while on the phone. One year, while visiting my grandmother, I decided to climb a large tree in her yard. I don't remember how high it was, but I was almost to the top. Now, being 11, I of course climb onto a dead branch and it snaps. I fall, plummeting to the ground. As soon as I realize I'm alive, I notice I can't quite move my left arm. I tell my brother to go inside and tell our grandmother. Now, my brother has Asperger's and was 2 years younger than me. He goes into the house, sits down and waits. I'm sure it was only a few minutes, but for me it seemed like an eternity. Finally, she hangs up the phone and asked him what was the matter. That's when he told her I fell out of the tree. At the hospital, somebody, the nurse or doctor, I don't remember, asked me about the details. I told them I lay there on the ground for a while. When I was asked why, my brother, who was in the office with us, said that he had to wait until my grandmother got off a phone call to tell her. My grandmother had to explain to them what was going on. I do remember a social worker ushering them out of the room and asking some questions. After that, both grandmother and mother explained to us that if it's an emergency, we need to tell them right away. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.